gur maigat agus táim lánsásta bhean sa libse inniu, se seachta na Gaeilge. I'm saying a few words by way of introduction in Irish, the first language of the state, allegedly, because this is a week in which the Irish language is promoted and celebrated. So thank you for the introduction. And can I thank at the outset DCU and in particular Helena, who I see down there, for organising this very important meeting. I know it was done at short notice, but nonetheless I'm told it has been a huge success so far. I'll make my introductory comments. I don't propose to speak for 20 minutes or anything close to it. And if I do, Euclid has said that he's timing me anyhow, because of course the important part of these meetings is the discussion and the sharing of ideas that happens around the table. We're talking about alternatives here. One of the most striking things in the Irish political narrative over the last number of years has been the absolute insistence on the part of the establishment that there is no alternative, that as unpalatable as austerity may be, as difficult as cutbacks might be, as awful as an attack on public services might be, that really in this state there was no alternative but to cut back and to impose these austerity measures. And I think it's something worth reflecting on is the extent to which that narrative gained a credibility, not just amongst the political classes or the commentariat, but indeed amongst ordinary working people, as they're called. I should say to you that I represent As a Teachta Dála, a constituency in central Dublin. It is composed of the North Inner City and out into the inner city suburbs. It's a constituency that would have amongst the highest levels of poverty, intergenerational poverty in the state. And it's an interesting constituency, though not unique, in which to be elected and to be active in times of austerity, because you get at times an almost confused view from the population as regards cutbacks and why they are happening, and indeed if they should be happening. So I want to say at the outset, in my own view, building an alternative, of course, has to be ideologically coherent. It has to be based on a coming together of political forces writ large in terms of political parties, independent thinkers, left-thinking economists, from, if you like, the upper stratum of society. But you're not really building a political alternative unless you have the belief, the confidence and the energy of the community and of working class people on the ground. We in Sinn Féin, the party of which I am a member and the vice president, opposed the intervention of the Troika. And when they came to town, when we objected to their presence, we were told, well, if you had your way, Ireland would shut down overnight. What's your alternative? Of course, the great myth was peddled and gained some currency and credibility that the Troika came to this country and bailed out the people. They saved our bacon. They saved our collective necks. I think whatever else has transpired in the years since then, I think people understand now at least that the Troika's intervention was not so much to bail out Ireland or her people, but to bail out the banks and certainly to save the euro currency. The Troika have now left, officially at least, but of course the Troika mentality stays with us in this state. And the current government, composed of Fine Gael and Labour, have taken their lead from the last administration, and they have carried on the same political strategy, which is about austerity and cutbacks for the working class and protection for the bankers and for the wealthy in society. Of course, the political establishment in this state have a long track record of fairly mindlessly relinquishing control and authority to the Commission in Brussels. They have established form on this matter. So, the Troika has left, but let nobody imagine that this will stop the decimation of public services, the deterioration of living standards for the vast majority of people, and that Irish people will continue to pay for the greed of speculators, developers, bankers, and, let it be said, the political failures for generations to come. So where's the resistance to this so far? I think much of the resistance has been what I would call passive, although important. So, for example, in some instances, people have refused to pay unjust taxes. Of course, once that happened, and I'm referring to the household charge, the government found a way, a legislative way, to collect taxes in the form of property taxes directly from people. And if people were to resist, they would find those taxes deducted from their pay or benefit. There have been localised protests, and parts of the voluntary sector and community organisations have been both animated and really effective in those protests, generally on particular issues. But in truth, so far, nobody has successfully brought everybody together into a mass protest movement, as has been seen in other countries. The trade unions have by and large been very quiet. Leaders of many of the trade unions, with some honourable exceptions, have dedicated as much or more energy to defending the Labour Party in government rather than defending the working class. So there is resentment in the population at large, having been forced to assume the odious debt of banks. Not our debt is the refrain, forced by the EU and Dublin government. And there is a resentment at the social and economic consequences of those government policies. That is, of course, true. Political opinion polling, and different people will attribute different levels of importance to this, do reflect the fact that people have become increasingly disillusioned with the establishment parties. It's now very clear that there is an appetite for an alternative. Some of that finds expression in independent candidates or non-political party movements. And indeed, people look to our own party, Sinn Féin, to provide an alternative. Our poll ratings have increased quite substantially. And I'm somebody who takes polling data with large pinches of salt, because, of course, the only poll that matters is on the day of an election. But nonetheless, I think it gives you some sense that there is flux in the system and opportunity. Right-wing parties consistently come together to support their issues, to support the status quo, to support the political and economic establishment of this state, because, of course, that is who they are. They have been consistently successful in doing that. And if we are serious here in this country, in this state, in terms of putting in a challenge on that and developing an alternative, then we on the left must do the same. We must unite around a progressive, rights-based vision in order to overcome the political and economic establishment that brought this state to its knees. And in doing that, we have to convince people that we have credible policies and the commitment to protect public services, to invest in jobs, and to protect the family income. Now, here's the tricky bit. We on the left in this state do not agree with each other on everything. By the way, nor do we have to. That is not a prerequisite. But what we do need to identify is a clear basis for the left to unite around a series of core demands, and mobilising people to not only act around those demands, but to engage politically in their communities and their workplaces around those demands. I know this evening we'll hear from a candidate for the presidency of the European Commission, Alexis Tsipras. I've pronounced that correctly? Yes. Thank you. Tsipras. Just to say, generally we're a little bit cynical around these nominations for the presidency of the Commission. I have to say, in Alex's case, he is the exception to that matter. I think he has proved himself and his candidacy an important and potentially unifying force for the left right across Europe. His message of left unity resonates with many, many people, not just in Ireland but beyond. So I want to afford him a very warm welcome to Dublin. And I'm sure also that the people of Dublin will elect at least one MEP to support his candidacy. I hope that it would be Lynn Boylan, my colleague from Sinn Féin, but it might equally be Paul Murphy, who spoke earlier, or indeed Breed Smith. I'm hopeful that Ireland as a whole will elect 4 or more MEPs who will support this candidacy. I think one of the important things that has been achieved by Syriza is the prospect of a left-wing government in Greece. And of course this prospect isn't only being weighed by the Greek people, but you can be very sure that the European political establishment have their eye on that prospect, and I have no doubt are worried by it. So here's another question for us in building our alternative. Are we prepared to take power? That's a question for us. So if we formulate the alternative, if we are confident in our alternative, in its credibility, in its deliverability, are we prepared to take power? That's a question. In Ireland, realistically, a left-wing government being elected at the next election, I think, is unlikely. But I've been wrong before. I hope to God I'm wrong on this count. But leaving that aside, I do believe that we can put ourselves in a position of providing a credible, strong and coherent left-wing position and opposition to the Conservative elements. I believe that we can do this. I also realise full well that Sinn Féin will not do this on our own. Taking power, of course, is more than just parliamentary majorities. For the left to really take power, we need to be very active in political engagement with people right across the spectrum. We need people on every street, in every community, in every workplace, working with us, those of us that are elected to public office, and also holding us to account, at times perhaps putting the brakes on us. There is no harm in that. We need people and communities to take political responsibility themselves and to actively work to improve our society. And I promise not to go on again, so I might just finish with this idea. I've told you already that I represent an inner city constituency, and within that constituency there are very many people, and this will be familiar to some of you around the table, who are so estranged from the political system that they don't think it worth their while to even come out and vote in an election. Now, I know I'm not breaking any news here by saying this, because I know this is an experience not just in the north inner city, it happens on the south side of the river as well. It's not unique to Dublin or to Ireland. But I think we need to have a very, very fundamental dialogue with our communities around the very basic act of using their democratic franchise. A lot of people that I talk to would say it's not worth their while. They're all the same. We've heard that. Read for that. There is no alternative. That represents a very serious crisis of confidence amongst people in the political system, yes, in the political establishment, yes, but also in the left. There is a crisis of confidence in our ability to agree, to unify, and to rally to those core demands of which I spoke. And elections are, by definition, divisive processes, in as much as you ask people to cast a ballot for one or another candidate. And of course they're competitive, and all of that is very healthy, because it hones our arguments and gives people a real choice. And I'm all for healthy competitive tensions between those of us who share a lot in common. I'm also aware that we don't have to agree on everything, but I think we do have to agree and accept that if we are going to produce something that is genuinely an alternative and of the left, then we need to come to that with goodwill, with a level of open-mindedness, and perhaps all of us, and I'm speaking to myself, Cathaoirleach, as much as to anybody else, to shed some of your own, maybe our own, fixed or even at times dogmatic views. That's the challenge for us. So it's about a negotiation in the first instance amongst ourselves, and establishing what is doable and what is deliverable. And then most importantly, it is about building absolute confidence and pride and demands around those core differences. There is an alternative. Of course there's an alternative. The alternative to austerity is no austerity. The alternative to slashing public services is to invest in public services. The alternative to emigration is opportunities at home. They're your alternatives. We need the political will, but also the political strategy and the political unity to make that alternative a real possibility.
Amen.